The Muslim community in South Africa went a step further by getting an interdict to stop the cartoons from being printed in various local newspapers. Judge Mohammed Jajbai concluded that the cartoons were offensive and an insult to the dignity of the Muslim people. The Media Institute of Southern Africa said that the ban on the publication of cartoons of the Prophet in South Africa was a source for concern and conflicted with press freedom.
Our problem as the Freedom of Expression Institute, our problem with that is that we believe that editorial decision making needs to be in the hands of editors. That it shouldn't be the courts that make decisions about editorial matters, particularly in cases where the media hasn't even expressed any intention of publishing something, and they are then gagged, becomes preemptive gagging. And so that kind of preemptive gagging of publications is something we feel goes against the kind of media freedom we have in this country, but also sets an extremely bad precedent. And particularly, I mean, those Muslims that have taken great pleasure in this interdict being issued could easily see that it rebounds on their own publications and their own media.
Well, as a journalist, I think a preemptive gag, a preemptive seeking of an interdict before publication is of course not great news and sets a very poor precedent. The Muslim community, on the other hand, argued that it was exercising its rights under the Constitution to go to the High Court to prevent any publishing of the cartoons. Of course, the judge agreed with that. We as editors have grave problems with that judgment. It of course has now been lifted, so it has no future precedent-setting power in our laws, and for me that's a good thing, although I do acknowledge that it was both sides exercising their rights.
And I would not ban or censor, and I don't support court interdicts against the printing of the cartoons and all of that. But I think it was a bit wrong-headed was the idea of just depicting Muhammad just because it was something that many Muslims would not want to see in the press. I wouldn't have taken part in that. If I had a reason to depict Muhammad in a cartoon, I would say I have my right to do that. There's a difference. So I wouldn't go out to gratuitously insult, but I don't mind offending religious groups if it's part of making a political point that I think is part of a progressive agenda.
Our courts have already taken the decision that this should not be done, presumably basing themselves on the constitutional and legal prescripts that are binding on all of us. However, it is clear that this judgment will not end the debate in our country, which in its narrowest terms relates to the balance between the right to freedom of speech and the right to freedom of religion.
My view is that the judge acted very precipitately in banning those cartoons when I think he should have waited until the newspapers had said that they were going to consider running those cartoons instead of deciding to issue an edict against the newspapers before they had made the decision. But the decision is bad, and it's a blot on freedom of expression. I feel that the newspaper industry has let itself down in not pursuing the issue, in challenging it.
Freedom of speech is an inalienable right of all South Africans, enshrined in our Bill of Rights after South Africa achieved democracy. Another freedom enshrined in our Constitution after this achievement is that of religion, belief, and opinion. Governments, the media at large, and the communities they serve need to encourage dialogue around this sensitive issue.
I think the government actually were not sort of responsible for bringing these cartoons that caused the uproar. So the issue is that it was done by a newspaper, and this newspaper has actually issued an apology. And the government has very clearly stated that there is no intention on part of the Danish society, the Danish government, of the Danish people to offend individual Muslims or Islam as a religion. And rather we would like to recall that we have had a long-standing and good relationship which we very much would like to see continued, and we are currently doing our utmost to address those issues.
The only thing that is required is that journalists and people in the media apply common sense, common courtesy, and a sense of decorum in terms of respecting people's dignity, respecting people's honor.
My initial instinct after the furore which my decision caused was to run away from any coverage of cartoons, never to have another cartoon in my newspaper. But I'm very grateful that that initial instinct is gone, and that I do believe as a nation we must continue to debate. The whole issue has raised for me very, very important questions of religion in a secular state, the constitution, its protection of religions, but more for me of how religions must talk to each other, and how our communities of interest like the media and religious bodies really do need to keep the lines of communication open. An editorial which we wrote, and which I firmly believe, is that in South Africa we don't need to see any huge battle between the Quran and the Constitution. We can coexist and not live in these parallel worlds.
Well, I would just like to emphasize that I think Muslims and Islam is getting a very bad name from the extremists among them. But when the fanatics, and one should not just say that they are fanatics among the Muslims, they are fanatics in all religions. But those who exercise the Muslim faith and the Islamic faith appear to go to great lengths to exhibit their dislike or distaste, which, and as I said earlier, goes totally against the grain as I understand the Islamic religion, which is peace be with you.
Our Bill of Rights enshrines that everyone has inherent dignity and the right to have their dignity respected and protected. The question that remains is, can secular and religious beliefs coexist? Can the challenges of freedom of the press and the religious sensitivities of communities be balanced and addressed without causing offense? Where does one draw the line?